Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, where we help you look, feel, and perform at your best. Can dieting cause you to gain weight instead of lose it? It happens sometimes. We seem to be living in a world where each day seems to bring new science that cancels out all past assessments. So how do we know if we're eating the right foods for our particular body's needs? Well, returning to the show this week to help us figure it all out is Dr. Alan Christensen. Dr. Christensen is a naturopathic endocrinologist who focuses on thyroid function, adrenal health, and metabolism. Dr. Alan is also a very talented off-road unicyclist. Really? And that's a thing. I have proof. But before we get to the interview, here's a review that just came in from Eric. He says, "Hello, Abel. I just want to write you a quick thanks. I've been following you for a little over a year and appreciate all you do. My 23-year-old son came home to live with us earlier this year, overweight and out of shape. He was always in great shape and a star athlete, but after a year of eating whatever and whenever, combined with no exercise, he needed a change. So I put him on the wild diet with moderate weight training and high-intensity cardio once a week. The results were shocking. My wife, who is a fitness trainer, and I were speechless. He lost 45 pounds in just under 12 weeks. He is now healthy, happy, and in great shape. Thanks again, Abel. You are the man." I can't take credit for any of that, but Eric, thank you for writing in, and please give your son my best. That is incredible. 45 pounds, especially at a young age like that, is just it changes the person who you feel like, right? And one of the biggest problems that happens, and you see this over and over again, is that these great athletes, especially in high school and sometimes in college, don't have practice anymore. They have to take that 9 to 5 or sedentary job in one way. They don't have the community that their team provided. And trust me, I went through some of this myself. Like, real life doesn't build those workouts in for you. It doesn't build that community in for you. You've really got to do it yourself. You've got to take the responsibility to make sure that you're practicing good health on your own, and also practicing self-defense against some of the ridiculous food that's out there. And all of not to mention the pharmaceuticals and all the other rabbit holes we can go down. But in any case, congratulations to you and your family. It's no small feat, and especially when your family's involved, it can be extremely difficult to try to change anyone's habits. So kudos to you guys. Really, really psyched for you, and make sure that you keep in touch. Drop a line anytime. So the easiest way to keep in touch is make sure that you're signed up for my free newsletter at fatburningman.com. If you want to get in touch, just reply to the email that I send to you. I read every single one, and if you want to share your story, I might even feature it, who knows, on this Fat Burning Man show, or on a live stream, or on the blog, or wherever, because the more people who are getting their health back, the more of a chance we have at an excellent future. And, some of the statistics are looking grim. I don't want anyone to get down, but in this episode with Dr. Allen, we'll talk about why being healthy these days is a fluke and why we should embrace that. All right, on to the show with Dr. Christensen. You're about to learn why you can't hack a garden, the drawbacks of over-exercising, why the liver decides if you gain or lose fat, and tons more. Let's go hang out with the doc. All right, folks, Dr. Alan Christensen is a naturopathic endocrinologist who focuses on thyroid function, adrenal health, and metabolism. He is a New York Times best-selling author whose books include The Metabolism Reset Diet, The Adrenal Reset Diet, and The Complete Idiot's Guide to Thyroid Disease. You may have seen Dr. Christensen on Dr. Oz, The Doctors, and The Today Show, and many others. Dr. Alan, though, is one of the very few people I've let put basically, you had my life in your hands on multiple occasions, in your office and outside of the office on a mountain. And you're one of the first people ever to come on this show 3 times. So thanks, wow, Doc, for coming back on the show.
Dude, that's awesome. I'm always glad for a reason to hang out with you.
It is a blast. I remember, actually, this might have been the last time we saw each other. It was before a health conference And the deal was, I think we had to wake up at like 3:30 or 4 in the morning if we wanted to go on a hike with you, which turned into a climb of the Praying Monk, which was it was just so much fun. You're a great leader. And I think it's important for people to know that you're not just a very professional person who's very good at what he does, but also in the outdoors, you're like an outdoor gymnast in some ways. And we can dig into that a little bit more. But in the first interview, I think this is like right after we talked for the first time.
The rock thing too, that came up back when, didn't it?
Yeah, totally. It's like riding off-road unicycles. There are no bounds for Dr. Christensen. So anyway, thanks for coming on the show again. And why don't we start right there? How do you, in a day when it seems like a lot of people are letting physical activity in the outdoors kind of fall to the wayside as phones take over our lives, how are you able to stay balanced being so busy and productive?
Boy, I think for me it would be like, how could I not? I think,
yeah.
I think once you've really had experiences of how those things can center you and just enrich your life and create so much meaning and joy, I don't know. I just couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't deprioritize it enough to let that happen.
Well, it's hard to be stressed out in traffic if you've been dangling off a cliff that morning, right?
It's totally hard. It's put things in perspective. Like, hey, this is kind of a drag, but I'm not going to die if I goof up, so I can get through this. And
yeah, absolutely. So anyway, you have a new book that touches on an extremely important topic that has always been very important, but really doesn't get talked about very much at all, which is not just the liver itself, but how the liver affects our health. So let's start there.
Yeah. It's a funny thing, but the root word itself actually shares overlap with the word live. I stumbled across that. Hepatos is one of the Greek word origins, but you can't live without your liver. And it's funny, our bodies, at one point we were just little specks of genetic material floating in the sea, and our environment that we needed was the environment we were in. But it was almost like as we evolved, we put on spacesuits, we put on these skin bags, and we could maintain our environment internally, and we could keep the right conditions and adjust those. And that always took calibration, because it would always change and break down and lose what we needed and lose some equilibrium. So we developed internal regulation. And any given moment, there's just a myriad of nutrients and food derivatives that we need to have circulating, hormones, messaging chemicals, and it's got to be kept spot on. And that all comes down to the liver to regulate this whole spacesuit that we're walking around in outside the ocean.
And most people don't realize how taxed our livers are these days, and not just by alcohol.
Right, for sure. It's a funny thing. For a lot of people, liver means just that. If I drink too much, I'll hurt it. Or if I smother it in onions and bacon, I could eat some of that.
It's the only way to make it delicious.
But yeah, the modern life, there's all these waste products that are normal things from metabolism. And the liver is posited to take those and recycle those and eliminate those. But now we've got so many substances that get dumped in that same bucket. And it's finite resources. It's got to use raw materials to process everything, and it's got only so much to work with. And then it's also a big part of how we keep energy steady. There's this balance of energy and fuel, body weight and energy output that the liver is just.
Yeah. And so in terms of the things that our bodies are having to deal with these days, in the modern world, when people walk into your office, what is their liver dealing with that they might not realize?
Over all the years, I've realized that the core complaints that I see are struggles with body weight. And I think waste is a big facet of that, more so than even weight. But people think about it in terms of weight. And then energy production. And so many things, could be bucketed to one or one of the other of those, or some combination. And when the liver's working perfectly, those things sort themselves out. We never get exactly the potential energy. I think about this as fuel. We never really get the exact fuel requirements for a given day. If you were to fill your car up with 5 gallons, drive exactly 5 gallons, that's why you've got reserve in your tank, because it's never exactly those needs. And it's the same way for the liver and your body's fuel. Today, I did a run this morning. I'll do some stuff this afternoon, and I'll eat food more or less per hunger, but I won't get exactly what I'm putting out. And when you're healthy, if you err a little over for whatever reason, your liver has a couple of big areas, glycogen and triglycerides, that it can use to convert that fuel into potential energy and store it. And it's fine. You're not suddenly up 4 pounds from that and miserable and bloated. You just got more fuel in the tank. And then some other day, like if I did the same stuff but got busy and missed a meal somewhere along the way, my liver could pull out some spare fuel and make up for that difference. And you wouldn't have to just crash in energy and have your brain shut down and become like the craving monster. But everyone already does that. Everyone does that to some degree, but it's how much. So when energy and weight and appetite don't sync up, then the liver doesn't have the flexibility to maintain metabolism.
Yeah. And fatty liver, I think those two words, or maybe that one qualifier in front of the word liver, is enough for me to my brain makes it more tangible, maybe because I've eaten it and seen it before. But the idea that might be happening to us on the inside is startling in a way that just like, oh, alcohol damages the liver, whatever. It doesn't connect those dots in the same way. But fatty liver, can you explain what that is and why we should think about it?
Yeah, it's a big thing. There's a whole spectrum, and the very worst part of that spectrum would be, fatal cirrhosis and liver failure. The earliest version can be just a few extra pounds that seem stubborn. And what's happening is, I talked about those two fuel depots, the triglycerides and the glycogen. Fatty liver is just too much triglycerides. That's all it is too much there. And when that approaches somewhere around 5% of the liver's mass by weight, it becomes pathologic. And it's just full of grease. It's just a filter that's full of grease. It's no more complex than that. And all these functions get compromised. And the weird thing about it is that, medicine, we think about our tests, because a lot of what we know is based upon what we can test. And some tests are good for identifying problems or for showing a problem is not there. So think about a pregnancy test, for example. If a gal peed on a stick and it said you're pregnant, well, we assume that's correct. But if it said she's not pregnant, we'd also assume that was correct. But if it said she was not pregnant and she was, we'd think about that as being a false negative. And with fatty liver, we can look at that through blood tests or ultrasounds or imaging tests or biopsies. And all the tests that are commonly available have an astronomical rate of false negative. So you've got to be rather diseased before it shows up on anything. No one does liver biopsies as screening tools. They're invasive. But one way that does happen is, I'm just going to make up something. Say I had a twin brother and my twin brother had a damaged liver and I wanted to donate some liver tissue to him for that purpose. So I would have to undergo a lot of testing to assure that my liver was reasonably functional. I'd have to show blood tests of that and also show that I was not diabetic and get an ultrasound done. And once I'd undergone all those steps, then I would need, as a final step, to do a liver biopsy. And in circumstances just like that, when healthy people want to donate liver tissue to a loved one, after they've passed every single hoop before the biopsy, 40% of them cannot give liver tissue because they've got fatty liver.
Wow, 40%.
Yeah, 40% of healthy adults. They've got advanced fatty liver disease. So that's the spectrum, and there's versions that progress from there. But honestly, the medical category, the term they use is, it's derogatory. I don't like it, but it's over fat, and it means someone that's carrying too much body fat. And that includes three things: people who are overweight or obese, or those who are healthy weight but under-muscled. They've got too little muscle mass. This is skinny fat or things like that. But if you put those groups together, almost all of them are somewhere in that continuum of fatty liver disease. And that's what's driving the illness.
And that was something that I read in your book that really just struck me, because often you hear people who are overweight or struggle with type 2 diabetes have a liver that is struggling also. What you don't hear is that the liver may be a causal factor that happens first.
Well, and the thing is that in diabetes research, they're using the term leaky liver. So if someone's diabetic, we define that by their morning fasting blood sugar. And the line in the sand is 126. If they wake up in the morning before they eat, the random sugar is consistently 127 or greater, we would call them diabetic. Now, let's think this through. Assuming that this wasn't some unusual circumstance, they didn't just eat.
Yeah.
And your fasting blood sugar is a rather dynamic marker. So what you're really seeing in that case is all the glucose spilling out of the liver as they were sleeping. It didn't come from a recent meal. And now they've upped the bar in technology to where we can differentiate. You could check your blood sugar, and now with better tech, you can say, hey, did that come from that lunch that I just ate, or did that come from what my liver leached out? So you can distinguish that. And of those who are diabetic, over 80% of their glucose is coming from their liver and not coming from a recent meal.
Wow, 80%. Now, the liver, though, and this is from like an old marathon textbook I read years ago, it was something like 400 calories of glucose. Is that about right? Like how much fuel is in there?
So spot on in terms of glucose. The two fuels, the glucose in the form of glycogen, which is just densely packed glucose. So plants make starch and animals make glycogen. And it's just kind of like a steel-belted radio. You got all these strings that are strings around strings, and then braids of those around braided up again. And each string can be comprised of rows of dots. So that's glycogen. So you've got that, and you're right, there's not a ton there. But then you've also got triglycerides. And glycogen you can't pack it as densely, but you need some of that to do a good job breaking down fat in the liver, the triglycerides. So you need some mixture there. And the drawback is when triglycerides become so predominant, you lose room for glycogen. And now you've just painted yourself into a corner because you've got all this triglyceride and no glycogen to really get it out with.
Now, that triglyceride doesn't come from ingesting dietary fat necessarily, though. That triglyceride comes from other things, right?
So our main caloric sources, we think about proteins, fats, carbs. There's also exogenous ketones. There's also alcohol to cover like all the bases. And I would pull protein out. There's a few things different about it. But the others, at a molecular level, they're all now, and they've all got distinct properties. We've got essential fats, we've got fibers from some carbs. They're all different in various ways. But just like in the furnace, when they go in the furnace, like down at that level of liver converting Krebs cycle to energy, so they're all oxaloacetate. They're all the same thing when they're finally broken down for fuel. They look the same. They're not chemically distinct from one to the other.
Yeah. How interesting.
So the liver, it's not even a matter of it working wrong. It's a matter of it working right when it's too full. So I think about like an airport where there's room for planes and they say, hey, stay up there in the pattern. So you've got all these fuel derivatives like glucose and triglycerides that you love to do something with, but when there's no room, you've got to leave them just floating around. You've got to leave them in the bloodstream.
Now, when it's overflowing like that or leaky, how did these 40%-ish of people get to that point? What happened before then for the liver to reach that state?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. So there's three scenarios that can exist in various combinations. So one of which is you just got too much fuel coming in. There's just too much fuel the body can handle. And any person, any animal could be force-fed or overfed, and it could be carbs, fats, ketones, alcohol. Any mixture of those things can achieve that.
And that's how you get goose liver pate, right? Is by literally overfeeding them.
It's kind of a harsh thing, but I was actually visualizing that as I was talking about it.
Yeah.
I think we're like psychically linked here. But no, totally. You force enough fuel in, and the liver finally gets overloaded with that. So that's one. The other one is the body is just not burning a lot of fuel for various reasons. And that can be one's activity, that can be shortcomings of one's burning capacity. And then the other one is more so just molecular issues that make the body not burn fuel effectively. And big things there would be micronutrients that are not present, or back to what you mentioned about the environmental toxicants, these little monkey wrenches that get in the cogs and prevent the reactions from occurring as well as they should.
And is that environmental, pharmaceutical? What do you typically see?
Yep.
Both those? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And they can work in different ways. So some chemicals, it's odd because I think about like a lot of micronutrients are cofactors. So you've got a key, and you got to get the key in the lock to open up, and that key is like a cofactor, like an enzyme can do that too. And there's many things that are kind of like that key that fit in that lock, but they don't really work right. So you get a spare key for your house from the locksmith, and you bring it home, and it doesn't fit like the old one does, and maybe you try hard enough and it breaks off, and now you can't do anything. So that's what toxicants do at a molecular level. They fit in a receptor in some way, but they don't really turn the switch, and they might even leave the switch stuck, or they might block the switch.
Yeah.
And right, the stuff from the environment, the plastic compounds, lead and mercury, and many prescription medications will act in those ways.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I remember when, and this was a few years ago, Allison and I both came into your office to screen for heavy metals and do a detox, and both of us were very high in lead. Even if you try to live as clean as you possibly can, for a lot of us, it's just not really in the cards in today's world, is it?
Something I saw that just, I don't know, it was like a ton of bricks on the head. So you can go to Antarctica and you can do ice core samples half a mile deep, and you can pull out DDT at measurable multiple parts per million.
Half a mile deep.
In Antarctica.
My God.
Yeah, so for sure we want to do our best, but we can't do perfectly.
So what are the toxins that most of us are dealing with then?
You mentioned lead is a big one, and the tricky thing is that there's many that are there, but there's few that are very measurable.
Okay.
There's many main categories would be solvents and pesticides and metals, and then also plastic compounds. And there used to be labs that would measure for all this stuff, and it was hard because you could see it, but they had a catalog of like 20,000 chemicals you could check off, and you could only get about 50 per blood vial. So you can't measure everyone for everything. Yeah. And a lot of things get trapped deep into the fat tissue, the liver, the brain, the thyroid. So they're not always apparent, but when they are trapped, your body tries to break them down, and it gets stuck at that point of metals. So barring a particle accelerator, you can't degrade something past that point of an element. So that's like one of the better ways to just say what's that total burden there.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of historically what the toxic level would be? Were they measuring it back in the day?
They weren't measuring it so much in people back in the day, but we've measured it in the environment. And we can also, there's good ways we can track how it was in the environment in the past. So, and lead actually more than many others, because lead and calcium are, they go together quite a bit in chemical ways. So lead ends up in the bones. So you can look at bone samples from archaeology and get a sense of what the ambient lead levels were in the past. And Rome and the Roman Empire, one of their big advancements was plumbing. So the word plumbing is from plumbum, which is the same that's the Latin word for lead. That's why lead is Pb on the periodic table.
Yeah.
So plumbers were lead workers. And in areas around ancient Rome, the ambient lead levels increased dramatically, about 1,000-fold from where they were in the past. And past that point, they increased another 2,000 to 3,000-fold from then, and they really escalated in the early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s. Automobiles, 30s and the 40s, and automobiles became prevalent, and lead was added to the gas, and lead was also added to indoor paints. So those things made another big dramatic spike in ambient background levels of lead.
Yikes. And a lot of that is, we're still dealing with it. There's still a ton of that around.
We are. We've come down a bit because we're not adding those things in, but it's still there. So the ambient levels keep recirculating, sadly.
Yeah. And okay, so with the Romans, how did that play out for them?
So this is funny. I've actually gone deep in this, and there have been some historians that have also understood the effects that lead has upon behavior and impulsivity and aggression. And the people that had the most exposure had the most resources. They had lead pottery and vases and utensils and, the indoor plumbing and all that. And some have argued that were it not for the use of lead, Rome may not have fallen.
Yeah. I've heard the same thing. What's interesting about that, though, is that we still have plumbing. We still have pipes. It might not necessarily have lead in it, but it certainly has a lot of other things in it. Now we're talking about plastics, the byproducts, the breakdown. I remember this is actually many years ago when I was living in New Hampshire. I think we had copper pipes at the time, and I came back from a run, which I just love to do, especially around that part of the country, and I just drank straight out of the tap well water, really good well water from middle of nowhere in New Hampshire. I drank it, and I could just taste the copper. I threw up in like 5 or 10 seconds. It was just like, goo. It happened immediately. I don't think most people experience that, maybe not that aggressively, but yet we all drink out of pipes that are not made out of pure water. So can you talk a little bit about how we could actually be getting some of these undesirable byproducts in the very water that we're drinking?
That's a huge one. I would highly advocate anyone to use purified water, and reverse osmosis is simple. There's fancier units that do more above and beyond that, but yeah, totally mandatory. So that's a big thing. This is something that surprised me to learn a while back, but our biggest single source is the air that we breathe in terms of the measured mass of toxicants that come into our body.
Yeah.
And we've worked hard to make our indoor environments energy efficient. And the drawback is all the stuff that gets released from our paints, our fake woods, our carpets, that just stays in here and concentrates.
I got this, I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically an air quality device that measures it, I think just over Bluetooth with your phone. It was like $70 or something like that. So I got that a few months ago, and it's startling. So we live up at 8,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. And depending on which way the air is blowing, depending on if it's coming from Denver or if there are wildfires or what have you, most of the time it's pretty good. It's like below 50 is considered like pretty good. But I have seen numbers up to like 400 some days, just when, the air is going that way or there's a wildfire, what have you. But if you go inside on days like that, then you're talking off the charts. Most people don't realize how bad that stagnant air is. And that's where most people spend almost all their time, with off-gassing from the paints, the carpets, the lacquers. It never ends. And also there's almost nowhere for the air to go. We assume that if it's air conditioned, it's cleaning everything out, but that's not really how it works, is it?
No. And this is bizarre, but so the liver, we think about like blood sugar and energy regulation, like diabetes, the diseases of that. There's a lot of papers now showing that air quality, like those who live in Mexico City, the research first started coming from places where it's more dramatic, but air quality is a stronger predictor of diabetes now than body weight or diet is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And air quality is not something that's, for the most part, getting that much better. There's a lot of marketing that says that it is from time to time, but especially in recent years. Even when we've been out, let's see, in Arizona by Phoenix, sometimes the air there is just horrific. What do you do in that case? Do you limit outside activity, or personally, I'm curious.
Yeah, some days that I will, or I'll go more out of my way to be higher up or a little further away from it, or use the air purifiers and do some more indoor things. But it's a tough thing.
It is. One of the things we've been trying to do as we travel all around the world trying to find a place to kind of settle down is looking for a place that does have clean air. And it is surprisingly hard to find. It's easy to rip on cities, like Phoenix or Denver or Boston or New York or what have you, especially a lot of the Californian cities for all of that. But it's really not that simple either, because we have to when we're going to certain places like Rocky Mountain National Park, for example, considered in most people's minds to be a pristine place of beauty, which it is. Sometimes that, because of industry and the way that the wind is blowing, and because there are almost no regulations in the West in terms of how much crap you can put into the atmosphere, sometimes that'll have air that is worse than the worst polluted days in Denver or in Phoenix or what have you, just because that's the way it is. So it's something that you definitely need to keep track of. And probably the easiest win for most people would be getting an air purifier in their bedroom, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And that's for many reasons. That's where we're sedentary for the longest period of time. And when we're sleeping, there's a lot of ways in which we're even more vulnerable to those effects. So yeah, just dumping any extra fabric in the bedroom, getting a good purifier, it's probably one of your number one priorities.
Yeah.
We always think about organic food and whatnot, and that's also important. But if you had to pick and choose, we breathe a lot more volume than we ever eat.
And it's so easy to have blind spots like that, isn't it? It's like, I'm all organic, I eat the best food ever, and you're just drinking bottled water the whole time now. So let's talk about that a little bit. Obviously we all need water, but what's the issue with bottled water?
Well, just the plastic byproducts. It's being produced in plastic and shipping and storing in that, and it's weird because there's two ways you can think about your decision making, and one is how you would do that in a legal system. We've got innocent until proven guilty, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that makes sense because people can make mistakes and lineups or whatnot, so that's valid. But then there's also the precautionary principle, which is like, well, if we're not sure, let's be careful. Mm-hmm. And the sad thing is that in terms of our environmental health, we use innocent until proven guilty rather than the precautionary principle. Right. And not only that, we use innocent until proven completely guilty beyond any possible rational doubt.
Absolutely.
So with plastic, you'll hear about various compounds like BPA that's awful. Well, now we use BPS, and that's still there. And a lot of evidence suggests that's just as bad. So a smarter thing is just taking that precautionary principle and saying, hey, look, let's just minimize our plastic exposure and call that good for now. And
yeah, well, there are so many things that you brought up in your book, and I'm trying. Okay, here it is. You said, and this really struck me, every new day seems to bring new science that cancels out all past assessments. What is that about? You're so right.
It's a funny thing. So there's this whole, it's been called like the hierarchy of evidence. Like people use like pyramids to describe this. And you've got different kinds of data. And a lot of kinds of data are really more so ideas or speculations or interesting observations. And they're good things to then research and then do good, solid outcome studies on. But sadly, they're often very counterintuitive. There's two main types of systems. There's simple systems and complex systems. And it doesn't even mean complicated. It just means that complex systems in some way are internally regulated. Mm-hmm. So as big as our galaxy is, as many moving parts as there are, that's a simple system. The stars don't care where they go, nor do the planets. So you can find a formula like gravity as a constant, and you can pretty much predict where things are going to go. But complex systems, they have internal regulatory mechanisms. So like the ecosystem or a living thing, you can't just say that 5 parts of this in will mean 5 parts of that out, where you could say that with gravity. And we always want to have this simple formula, this is good, this is bad, this is the one principle that matters. But there's over 10,000 known biochemical pathways that affect how our bodies work. And we can only say X will do Y when we've watched X do Y in large numbers of people for large numbers of years.
Yeah.
We always want to have a simple prediction. And when we look down at that level of animal studies, test tube studies, hypothesis, it's the Wild West. You can find tons of contradictory stuff. And the contradictory stuff is mediagenic, it's exciting, and it's counterintuitive. Mm-hmm. So that's where the flip-flopping comes from. That's where all the different ideas come from.
Do you think that's gotten worse recently in the age of the internet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Better and worse. So I guess when I first got into this as a kid, any random book I could find in the library about food, that was like a bonus or a gold mine. There was so little information at all.
Yeah.
And so that stage, it was just finding out information, not even like qualified stuff. People just spouted off their own pontifications, and that was awesome. That was a treasure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now we've got this abundance of data, and the trick is, how do we make sense out of that? Mm-hmm. What do we do when there's experts conflicting and when there's new contradictory studies? So that's the real art now, is how do we really refine it? And you can't just say everyone's different, everyone has to find things out for themselves, because for one, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
And the second, it's not completely true. We're different in some ways, but you don't photosynthesize. There's some basic ways in which we're about the same there.
Yeah. Well, there are patterns and pillars of health that don't change to some degree, right? Like there are. At what point do we know enough is a question that we might want to ask ourselves as well, right? Because like it might be debatable if our grandparents or great grandparents knew enough to be generally healthy enough to live a lifespan that was healthy into the later stages, right?
This is the thing I think about a lot too. There's a concept called the Malthusian equation, which argues that a population of animals in a stable environment will reach a maximal upper limit that the environment can withstand. Mm-hmm. I grew up in northern Minnesota, and we had deer in our woods, and so you've got 40 acres, and you can have, I'm going to make up a number, a herd of 100 deer living in there. And if one year there's like a lot of growth and a lot of tree buds, maybe now that population goes to 120.
Yeah.
Well, they eat up all those buds, so now they're down to 80, but they're always at that threshold. And for us, up until the last several decades, pretty much all humans lived in that equation. Mm-hmm. So whether they were bright or not, they weren't overfed, you know?
Yeah.
And almost everything that goes wrong with health, people talk about like the belly fat or the subcutaneous fat, but honestly, the organ fat, the stuff that builds up in the liver and the pancreas, you know, this is a top of a pen. That's probably a couple grams, I'm guessing. Mm-hmm. The mass of that much fat, which would be a lot smaller in the pancreas, that's diabetic. To plug in that much fat to your pancreas, you're now diabetic. Wow. Or to plug in that much fat distributed evenly throughout the liver, now you're close to liver failure. So, wow. Yeah, and we never had that potential before, maybe not because we were smart enough to choose broccoli. We had no other choices, and also we were at that limit of our food availability. If we ever had more food, we had more kids and ate up the extra food.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's so crazy to think about this, but my dad is one of 7, and the biggest reason that he was one of 7 is because he grew up on a farm, and my grandparents needed extra hands to help them on the farm. And you think about like even my generation, not to mention the one that's after us, but how much has that changed in that period of time? Just a complete reversal. But also you look, and I think you may have mentioned this in your book, back in the 1950s, I think it was 10% of people were overweight, somewhere around there. And these days it's like more like 70%. By 2030, I read it's going to be 85%.
Yeah. You know, that thing that I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask, like, what do you, as a physician and as a person and as a father, what do you think about that?
It's the biggest problem we face. And if we throw in, and that's just too heavy, if we throw in the under muscle to where there's too much fat, too little muscle, that's right now, per gender and per region, 80 to 90% of the population.
Wow.
So it's a fluke not to be there. Wow. It's an odd thing because I hear stats about how now there's more death from obesity than from infectious disease. So that can be a half empty or half full. That can be like, wow, great, we've got less infectious disease deaths, but there's something else we got to deal with here.
And is that progress? And what are we progressing toward? We might want to ask as well, right?
Well, and the part that excites me about this is that given the liver's core role of this and the liver's radical resiliency, you can theoretically lose most of your liver and it can come back again. So what I argue is that it's not a matter of trying harder to starve because, you know, energy, appetite, and body size, if you just starve, however, sure, you can change the body size, but energy and appetite don't go where you want. Mm-hmm. And then if you try to eat well and eat intuitive and eat clean, you may do better in a lot of health ways and energy and appetite, but for those with weight struggles, they may not see that resolve, and some can even have that go up. So it really excites me that you can get a clean slate on your liver and clear out that extra burden of triglyceride and restore the glycogen and not have to like live on with dieting, but actually get it to where those things sync up again.
And I'm sure you've seen this so much more than I have, but when people come in a state of illness, let's say the liver is an issue for them, the ability of the body to bounce back and heal, especially when you're talking about the liver, is extraordinary, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And that's the cool thing. You know, I tell my doctors that it's so much fun to be doctors and not mechanics, because the mechanic, you got bald tires and a loose bumper. Those are 2 problems. You know, with the doctor, you can have a dozen symptoms that come down to 1 problem. And if you resolve that core issue, the body will sort out a lot of the rest.
Is there a core issue that you're seeing more of recently that people might not be aware of?
You know, this is a high level discussion. You're a brilliant guy who's thought about these things. I'm just going to throw this out with your audience and just go a little further off the plans. But I really think about 2 big factors that you could boil almost all chronic health down to. Now, we've got infectious disease, you've got accidental disease, but almost all chronic disease, the cardiac, the cancers, the brain aging, even a lot of susceptibility to infectious disease. One of those would be a class of chemicals called adipokines. And these are things that are made from that organ fat especially. And they drive the immune system, the detox pathways, the hormone regulation. So that's one. The other category I would talk about would be the HPA axis. Many think about this in terms of adrenal, and that's why I talked about that in a prior book. But yeah, one state of stress adaptation, and then one's level of adipokines. If you could boil it down to like 2 variables, I think those are the biggest single factors that predict long-term health outcomes. And
stress is something that seems to be getting worse. People are wound up pretty tight, and technology seems to be to blame.
It's a weird thing, in a lot of ways. Like kids today, I've got a 15-year-old son, a 20-year-old daughter, and they're socializing. They don't feel driven to learn how to drive. For us, we probably 16th birthday, you gotta get your license to get out of the house. And,
it was a way to see the world, wasn't it? Even for my generation, it felt like
totally.
But kids these days have already seen everything.
Well, and that's the thing, is that they've scratched that impulse for social connection. They feel like they have, but it's almost like being filled up on junk food. You're full. Now you don't want that broccoli,
right?
But didn't really get what you would have gotten from that broccoli. So you don't really seem to get the benefits of the connection, but in a way you feel like you don't need to go out of your way to acquire that anymore.
Are there other things like driving that might be getting lost right now? Because it's not just driving, right? There's a whole thing. There's a whole rite of passage that goes around that. It's an entryway, or at least it was, into adulthood, freedom, independence, responsibility, what have you. What else are you seeing?
Well, I've not an expert on this. I've seen a bit of data arguing that in some ways, some of the bad things that were common among teen years are decreasing. So that there's that. But yeah. But general health, the concerns are there that chronic disease has been really on the uptick, and it's really driven by those 2 factors more than anything.
How do you raise your kids to be flukes in a good way? A fluke like you.
Well, I'm doing my best, and I don't think I've got it totally down. But our son, we do a lot of outdoor time with him, and we take him backpacking quite a bit, and he and I love to boulder and climb, and he didn't really get the bug for endurance activities like I have, so I go out of my way to do more of what he likes to do, but we connect pretty deeply in those ways, and I think that's important. He's also, we would do a lot of our little rides, short rides around the house at our last place, and he would talk about these various story ideas, and I kept encouraging him to take time and write, and turn off the electronics and think and just write down these ideas. And so he wrote his first book when he was 13 and finished his second one a couple of weeks ago.
He's
writing sci-fi novels, and he's
cool.
Passionate about that and literature, and he enjoys going deep in those ideas. So yeah, I think if you're exposed to things that are not just junk food and junk experiences, that you would get a taste for them. They're preferable.
I would say writing a book at 13 is better than driving anyway.
He's pretty eager to drive too.
Nice. Well, I mean, you have so many great things that I want to talk about here. One that really stuck out to me was the people who attempted your reset program for the liver, who didn't get the full benefits. Nearly all of them, you write, were over-exercising, not under-exercising.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, this is something that is a big. I'm glad you brought this up. It's a really important mindset. I think we've been led to believe that if we take care of ourselves, say we have more weight than we want and it's healthy for us, if we do the things that are good for maintenance, then that should all reverse. And it's so often not true. So it takes being in a mindset about dropping some inches as being a special project. And what would pull you out of that may not be what keeps you out of that. And the regimes that work best for maintenance may not be the best regimes for dropping the weight. So in the program, I argue for taking 28 days and not doing just pretty minimal activity. I actually talk about some micro workouts, so you're still engaging your muscles.
Yeah.
But I want the body to be able to run on a really low fuel budget so it can pull out those stores more effectively. And that's one of the biggest pitfalls. But after that, there's mountains of data saying that those who maintain successful weight loss and health in a zillion ways are the ones who are active, but just not then.
Right. Isn't that interesting? Well, it actually reminds me of when I did that TV show with Kurt, who started out at 352 pounds, really morbidly obese, having a lot of trouble, despite what the TV shows us. At the beginning, especially, he was doing very little exercise, very little physical activity for the same reason that you talk about. When a lot of people are changing the way that they eat, if they also start exercising in a really intense, aggressive way, especially if they're not used to it, those things really start to fight against each other, because it's hard to not overeat when you're over exercising, right? It's just the way it is. It's very easy to overeat the budget that you just exercised off, especially if you're relatively new to exercising. It's easy to pump up your stress hormones really quickly, too much. All of a sudden, it's just too much. Yet, you're totally right. Like once you reach that maintenance threshold or stage in your life, things completely change. Sometimes flip on their head. What you are doing to get there can do the opposite of serving you once you get to that maintenance side. So how do you help people make that transition from, because they'll have a new body, right? If they're following the way, if they're following good nutrition anyway, over the course of the next few weeks, few months, their body will be changing, and it might actually be more enjoyable and actually fun again to start exercising once you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
For sure. And part of that's just change from size, but a lot of it has changed from chemistry. And many people do not reach what their target is in 28 days, but then what I'll encourage is being stable for a period of time. And I talked about certain frequencies that are safe to repeat that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for sure, when you've come to that place, exercise is a pleasure. You enjoy that. Your body wants to move and feel vibrant and alive, and it's a whole different experience.
And I think you're such a great poster person for that, because unless there are videos, and I'm sure there are, but like going hiking with you and your son, I had the pleasure of doing that. You're both jumping, climbing, balancing on almost everything the whole time. How do you develop that, and why would you?
I think that there's a lot of our brain wrapped up into managing three-dimensional terrain that we don't get to challenge enough.
Yeah.
And for sure, movement of any type is better. More is better than none. But, our brains were really not made to make us happy cogs in a corporate modern wheel. They were made to help us navigate treacherous environments and not get killed and find food and get a mate out every now, or get a baby out every now and then.
Yeah.
So when we're in situations that require us to use balance and agility and thought in those ways, that's a huge thing for maintaining good brain function. Alertness, cognitive capacity, also mood, offsetting negative mood states, and yeah.
And that requires kind of doing unpredictable movements and unpredictable terrain, and challenging yourself to do it in a way that's fluid, almost like a squirrel on a telephone wire, right? You have to let go at some point.
Yeah, and anyone can do that at a level that's appropriate for them. Just hiking is a great start for that. Just being on some uneven terrain, just being around vegetation and geologic structures outdoors, it radically shifts how the body works. And
the vision and the brain, so many things about it are good for us. Hopefully there's some fresh air in there as well. We have time for a couple more. But let me ask you, what am I missing here? There's one more thing that I definitely want to talk about, but I want to leave some space. Is there anything that you'd like to bring up?
We've covered a lot of good bases. Let's dive
cool. Let's go right to this. You say you do a little bit of ripping on the word hacks, especially health hacks these days, and you say something that's I think brilliant. You cannot hack a garden.
Well, you can, but you wouldn't want to.
You could try, yeah.
If I said you can, that would be a misnomer, because you can hack a garden. That's probably not what you want to do.
But I think it's a really good point, especially in the age of the internet, when words can be used as weapons or as hype tools or what have you. What's the matter with the word and concept of health hacking?
Well, that's funny, because there's a lot of people who embrace that term. They're saying a lot of fine things, so I don't want to be divisive. Yeah. But I think there's something behind that, to where I guess that goes back to the complex and the simple systems. The complex systems, we have to nurture them, and we have to understand that they have this internal wisdom. I'm a naturopathic physician. We've got a 2-century lineage, and they talked about this healing power of nature, this wisdom of the body. And I guess I don't think about there being some magical glow-in-the-dark force that floats around, but there's just a powerful tendency towards moving this all the universe is driven by entropy, and then life reverses that. Life has this capacity of taking things in disorder and making them into greater order. So you can always find some chemical pathway and think, oh, this is the one that matters, and this pathway is sped up by this and slowed down for that. So if we just do more of this and less of that, we will then game the system. And well, that pathway is also connected to that pathway, which will slow down if this one speeds up. And that goes on just about forever. Mm-hmm. So you can't really find one thing and one variable and say, let's just take that to the moon and call it all good. It's got to be part of the big overall system of the body.
Well, it's kind of like racing a car or something and just slamming down on the gas the whole way and being like, I'm going faster, I'm redlining, this is a good hack. But that obviously doesn't turn out so well if that's the way you're thinking about it.
Well, the other tricky part is that our self-judgment and our intuitions can be wildly misleading and wildly accurate. We could do something that has no effects, but if we feel strong convictions about it, or if it really makes sense with our understanding of how the body works, that itself can be powerful. We talk about placebos and then the opposite, the nocebos. If we fear harmless elements of food and we develop a lot of complex ideas around that fear, that can be as harmful to us as a knife in the stomach. Yeah. So that's the difficulty about taking things too far based upon speculation, is that you could create things that seem to work but take you in the wrong way long term, or you could preclude yourself from things that could be helpful based upon these short-term errors.
And there's always this tendency to look for that silver bullet, yet nature considers itself the whole. It's an ecosystem, right? And so is the body. And I think when you, and I've used the word hack. I tried it. I'm like, I don't like this word, but and I think the reason is because if you have this idea that you're being hierarchical with the needs of your body and you're going to control your body, you're going to tell it what to do, you're going to get it to this weight and this body fat. At some point, your body's not going to like that very much and might, stop following every little whim that your brain has.
Well, and I think about things like I've read studies about changing in performance, about changing fuel ratios to make the body burn more of this or burn less of that. And in the big scheme of things, our bodies will burn what they need to burn, and they'll tap into whatever they can tap into. Our whole goal is to survive, and we don't change that. You don't really, you can't teach a car to run differently by pouring something different inside of it. It's already set up to burn things the way it will. And if it's got multiple fuels, it'll adjust however it best sees fit. But yeah, there's so much wisdom there that we think we can just change some inputs. Now the whole system will think, oh, okay, I guess I have to do that. No, it's complicated. It's self-regulated.
And in the Western world, we treat the body much more like a mechanic would a car. Whereas there's this one thing wrong, it's this one pathway or what have you, but it's really through cooperation with your body, through listening to your own body and kind of becoming your own, I guess, self-reliant guru of ecology, at least of your own body. That's really hopefully the thing that people are trending towards, at least at the maintenance stage. It's a dance. You need to, like you were saying, with the deer, the population of deer, you need to stay within I don't want to say the boundaries, but you need to dance with whatever is going on. It's a moving target.
Well, and the other thing that I think a lot about too is that the situation we're in is largely unprecedented, and we can look to. There's been large epidemiologic studies, and there's data from our distant past, and we should be inspired from those things, and we should learn from those. But we have to realize that a lot of things took place in environments that are not the same as ours are now in terms of chemical exposure, or like the phones that we were talking about. And so the real trick is, how do we make sense of this given the facts on the ground?
Well, I can't believe it, but we're just about out of time. Your work is so important, Dr. Christensen. It has been for a long time. I'm glad that we've known each other for a while at this point. But for those who would like to know more, who are listening, where can they find you, and what are you working on right now?
Best source is Dr. Christensen, DrChristinson, drchristenson.com. Easiest place to find all that. And I'm working on the next book. And also, like that high thing before, I'll share this with you. There's two directions I'm playing with. One of them might be the invisible illness. It might be about how there's normal symptoms that our adipokines, our stress load can cause to come and go. And I think many have chased various fad diagnoses and got stuck in spirals of problems that weren't that solid. And so I want people to really understand how some things, how you can really make sense of what is a real medical condition and what's not. And then when the what's not, it's still real, but how do you address that? How do you go take care of many of these nuisance symptoms? So that's one. The other one is that I think we've been on this arc of almost like a gotcha game of this food that you thought was okay that now really isn't because it's got this thing in there. And so I want to reverse that arc. So I want to talk about just how variety of food categories can be an important thing, and also a lot of the science that we're excited about in our clinic about how to reverse the intolerances and the sensitivities, how to get back to like a full spectrum of healthy natural foods. We're not talking like Twinkies, but how to really have a good variety of good simple foods again and do well from that. So yeah, they'll both come out. I'm not sure about the order.
Well, right on. I'm sure it'll create a whole new army of flukes around the world, and let's hope it does. Dr. Christensen, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Likewise. Happy to see you, dude.
Hey there, listener. Thanks so much for listening to the very end of this episode. As a special bonus, I'm including a new original song that I made up just for you, live on the spot, as part of my new improv music video series. I hope you like it. You can check out hundreds of these original songs and more for free at abeljames.com. Here we go. This episode is brought to you by Wild Superfoods and listeners like you. Whether you're looking to drop a few pounds, maximize performance for your next competition, or simply stay young and energetic, you need a name you can trust. That's why my wife Allison and I created Wild Superfoods. Our nutraceuticals and cutting-edge health supplements are literally the products we've been taking ourselves daily to upgrade our nutrition and optimize our health for the past 3+ years. And we're extremely excited to say Wild Superfoods is finally ready for you, with much more to come. When you buy from Wild Superfoods, you're supporting a small family business, not a massive faceless corporation. We don't have any investors or stockholders to please, so our priority is you. We want to help you become as healthy as you possibly can be. Also, starting our own family company, it's kind of cool, has made it so we can create these shows for you without outside sponsors clouding our message of health. So if you believe in what we do, please check out Wild Superfoods. We think you'll dig it. And as a listener of Fat Burning Man, you can save over $80 on a one-time purchase or save over $128 when you select the subscribe and save option. Also, you can get free access with subscribe and save to our Fat Burning Tribe coaching and meal planning community. That place is awesome. I'll see you in there. It's usually at least $27 a month. So check out Subscribe and Save from Wild Superfoods if you want to get the tribe for free. We think you'll like it. So all you have to do is head on over to wildsuperfoods.com to order your very own health boosting goodies for a big time discount. One more time, that's wildsuperfoods.com. Thanks again for listening. Well, hey there, listener. This is Abel one more time, and I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of the Fat Burning Man Show. If you liked it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you might be listening to or watching this show right now. And if you have a second, please leave me a quick review for the Fat Burning Man Show. I read every single one of them, and every time you leave a review, it gives us a little boost in the rankings, and that helps other people find this show. And if you can think of someone else who might enjoy and benefit from this free show, please take a second to share it with a friend or a family member. And if they're like, what is this Fat Burning Man thing? That's a really silly name. You could be like, you're right, but here's the deal. We've recorded over 250 episodes of the Fat Burning Man Show with thought leaders in health from all over the world. And so far, we've won 4 awards, hitting #1 in health in more than 8 countries internationally. We have more than 30 million downloads already, but we're just getting started. I can't believe any of this, by the way, and couldn't do any of this without you, so thanks once again. But here's some more good news. You can download and listen to every single episode of the Fat Burning Man Show for free with 0 outside advertisements, no outside sponsors, and no corporate overlords. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com. I'll give you a second here just to type it in, fatburningman.com. And you'll get all the show notes, transcripts, and video and audio versions for all the past episodes of the Fat Burning Man Show for free. Better yet, enter your email at fatburningman.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll even send you a quick start guide so you can take your health into your own hands right now, along with a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes as a special thanks for signing up. Once again, just go to fatburningman.com right now, enter your best email to get your free goodies with a bonus surprise straight to your inbox. This is Abel James signing off. Thank you so much for listening once again, and have a great week.